Hey there, I'm Travis Patterson, and welcome to Drive and Change. Here, you'll find unfiltered insights and hard-hitting questions that challenge the status quo in law and in life. As a personal injury attorney in Fort Worth, Texas, I've seen firsthand how challenges like distracted driving and family safety issues impact our community, but I refuse to accept these problems as inevitable. In this podcast, we'll dig deep into real-world problems, bringing you practical solutions from my experiences in law, and in parenting, and in entrepreneurship. I'm not here to preach. I'm here to start conversations that make you think differently and provide actionable advice that you can use right away. Welcome to Driving Change. Let's get to it. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Driving Change podcast. Very honored today to have the Battons with us. Battons are good friends of ours and just admire both of these guys a lot for what they're doing in our community, and we are going to get into it. I got a quick intro on Elizabeth and John Batten. The Battons are here. They want to help you raise launch-ready kids who wholeheartedly engage with the real world. They are very proud parents of 3 wonderful teenagers. They are wonderful. I've gotten to know all of them. They are awesome. And they are passionate about educating parents to know the facts about our current digital landscape so they can set healthy boundaries for their children and help you set healthy boundaries for yours. The key to success here is banding together with other families and sticking to a plan. Their message should leave you encouraged and empowered. Elizabeth and John, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We're so glad to be here.
So this podcast, we bounce around topic, a lot of different topics, important stuff. But I have to admit, this topic, as I've been getting ready for this one, has probably given me the most anxiety. We're going to talk about anxiety today, but just it's really scary what's going on with kids and phones and social media.
There's a lot, there's a lot to talk about.
There's a lot to talk about, right? So get comfortable. So how did you guys get started on this journey? Tell us about kind of y'all's story.
Yeah, well, we've always kind of been a less is more tech family. We've always wanted our kids to be fully kids. Mm-hmm. So we kind of media deprived our children a little bit when they were small and let them add a little bit more along the way. But we were propelled into this conversation like real time when our oldest was 12. He was in 6th grade. Okay. And he came back from an overnight field trip, and he had seen some really disturbing content on a friend's phone.
So how long ago would that have been?
It was 8 years ago.
8 years ago. So cell phones were already kind of a thing.
They were a thing, most of
2015, 2016-ish, something like that.
Most of his friends did not have cell phones at that time. Right. So this was kind of unusual, and we were like, okay, I guess here we are. Like right. We had been hoping that this day, hadn't we thought we had a little more time, but all of a sudden here we are. Our child has seen something really disturbing on a phone. What are we going to do about that? And we were really sad and mad about it.
And just to be clear, we're talking about seeing hardcore pornography.
Pornography at the age of 12.
At the age of 12.
Yeah, I mean, not rated R, like way beyond. Like we felt like we sent him on this, trip as a 12-year-old, and he came back as a 19-year-old, right. So fortunately, about 2 weeks later, my friend Chelsea Ray calls me and she says, hey, do you and John want to be part of a discussion with some other families? We're going to get together. We're going to let the boys play outside. The parents are going to talk. We, as parents of a high school child, want to tell y'all about the landscape of the high school.
Yeah, here's what's coming.
Cell phones. Here's what's coming. Yeah. And so we said, absolutely, we want to do that. And we gathered with this group. There were 10 families. And our friends just, told us all about how the phones were changing, how high school kids related to each other. They weren't talking as much. They had their, brand to uphold and work on all the time. Oh, like their social media brand. Yes. Gosh. And not to mention, they could see things like binge drinking and vaping at, we're talking 14-year-olds watching college, vaping and binge drinking because they're all these kids are like 2 degrees removed from each other. Right. So at that meeting, we kind of decided as a group of families, we're going to hold off on the smartphones as long as we can. We made it to about the end of 7th grade, which at the time was actually pretty good. And we're going to hold off on social media through middle school. And we did. And it really made a difference for these boys. They found other things to do, basically. Right. And when they finally got the technology, they didn't need it quite as much.
So it wasn't just your son that seemed to have benefited from the absence of the phones and social media, but his buddies seemed to really respond to that as well.
His buddies. And they all knew that they couldn't pull the nobody has a phone with us because we were like, no, we know 9 other families whose sons don't have a phone.
Okay, so obviously your kids have come out strong. You're still working on it too. I know you got kids at home still. So let's talk about just kind of what's going on with kids in general population, right? Because it's kind of scary. It's very scary. And it's a long laundry list. But what, just kind of on a high level, what is social media doing to teenagers today, just in their mental state, their productivity, their relationships with each other, their growth and maturity? I mean, what are we seeing? What's the data showing?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably there's a lot of data out there, Travis, and a lot of people will argue with different sets of data, and the tech companies have some studies where they try and say, no, this is beneficial.
Right.
And really, just as a brief aside, those studies where they're arguing it's beneficial are just kids saying they like it.
Sure.
It's not really showing that there's a benefit to it. But I think probably the one that's beyond dispute would be the Surgeon General's advisory report. Mm-hmm. Surgeon Generals make advisory reports for societal issues, right? Mm-hmm. Like drunk driving or HIV and AIDS when that was new. I mean, it's usually big issues. So for a Surgeon General to release an advisory on social media means there's something going on there.
Yeah.
Your question was, what is it doing to them?
Right.
I mean, I think it's a question in my. The best way to think about it, it's not. It is what it brings into their life, right? In terms of bullying, in terms of pornography, in terms of
violence sexual content
too soon. But it's also what it keeps out, right? So it's just the time it takes, right? So I think the best way to look at it is how much time are kids spending online, and when you look at the data on that, I mean, Gallup did a study, and so when they add up social media, which they do include YouTube, but YouTube is not just educational anymore.
It's not just how-to videos anymore.
There's a lot of
it's a two-way street.
Short form videos that just hook them. But I mean,
YouTube Shorts. It's the same thing as like little reels and stuff.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So percentage spending at least 4 hours a day of all teenagers is 51%, and the average is 4.8. It's a little higher for girls than boys. It's 5.3 versus 4.4.
So the average teenager is spending about 4 hours a day on social media.
Almost 5, actually.
Almost 5 hours a day.
Almost 5.
So where do they even find 5 hours?
Where does that right? So where does that come from?
Right.
So it comes out of, I mean, just
everything.
Set the statistics aside. If you took 5 hours out of your life every day, what would you have to give?
Relationships,
study time, and sleep. And so you can see in the data as well, kids don't sleep as much or as well when they're on social media. And that has all kinds of physical problems, not least of which would be anxiety and some of the other things we'll talk about. Yeah,
so, I mean, are y'all familiar with what's called the happiness curve, or what used to be called the happiness curve, I guess, where it's a U shape, basically, and I don't think it holds anymore, but prior to like 2014, 2015, we had this thing in, that psychologists called the happiness curve, where like in your youngest years, you're super happy. And then as people kind of get older and it kind of hits the peak and around like when you turn about 50, that's like not your happiest phase, right? You get less happy. And it makes sense, right? You're getting stressed, you've got bills to pay, you've got kids to raise, you've got to figure out what you're doing with your life. But then after that, you kind of start to get really happy again. So it's just like this U-shaped curve. So it's called the happiness curve, and it looks like a smile. It's kind of cool.
This is great news, because we just are in our early 50s. And we're pretty happy.
You're turning the corner.
We're pretty happy. So,
You're turning the corner. Yeah.
It's only going to get better.
I've got a little ways to go, but they realize it doesn't apply anymore, because kids on the front end, as you guys probably know by now, aren't as happy as they used to be. And this is the really scary stuff, because you don't get your teenage years back. You don't get your 20s back. And now we have teenagers kind of wasting that prime happiness. It should be the most joyous time of their lives, because they're stuck on social media. I mean, we all know, if you look at social media, even as an adult, for 20, 30 minutes, and you look back up, you're like, that was a waste of time, and I don't feel any better about myself.
Absolutely.
Than when I started. And so it doesn't take a lot of, fancy experiments to know that it's not a good thing to be on social media for a very long period of time.
Right.
Kind of sucks the life out of you.
Oh, absolutely.
And you make a good point, and I'd love to circle back to it at some point, but just we've got to lead by example.
No doubt.
We can't ask our kids to not be using social media if we're doing it at the dinner table.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So mental health issues are increasing with young people, and they have been ever since 2014, 2015. That's when we see smartphones taking off front-facing cameras taken off, Instagram taken off, and so you've got this combination, this confluence of all those kinds of things, and then you see the decline in the mental health, particularly with young women.
Yes, absolutely, more so with the girls. Now, the boys have their own issues with the video games, and we'll talk about that some too.
Well, yeah. I mean, but even the social media too. I mean, it's affecting boys too, but,
yes.
but girls. I mean, we're seeing increased rates of self-harm.
Oh, absolutely.
With young women. I mean,
yeah, suicide has jumped like 30% in the, let's see, from the years. I just have a statistic on that actually. The number of 13 to 18-year-olds who committed suicide jumped 31% between 2010 and 2015. Okay, and I mean, that's before probably every single kid had a smartphone. So, and then the number of teens who felt useless and joyless in that same 5-year period, kind of what you're talking about, feeling useless and joyless jumped 33%. So, like you said, our kids, they're not as happy.
Well,
it's nonstop comparison. I think it's the biggest.
I didn't get invited to that party.
And you can see it live. Like it used to be, maybe you heard about the party on Monday and that was a bummer. But to sit there and watch it happening in person is just devastating.
Yeah, I'm at home with my parents and all my friends are at this other thing.
Right now. Yes, it'll ruin your night. Trust me.
Right.
We've been there.
And I think everybody understands that likely that are listeners, but we're talking about Snap Map in particular. Right, like so on Snapchat, there's a map where you can see where all your friends are at any time. So they look at that and they know in real time if they're being left out or not.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Well, and girls, or I say girls, but girls or boys could be posting photos live on Instagram also from wherever they are, the event they're at.
So the Surgeon General, again, on this thread is talking about social media perpetuates body dissatisfaction, disordered eating, social comparison, and low self-esteem, especially among girls. And so when you look, I think the saddest statistic out there, Travis, is one on emergency department visits for non-fatal self-harm.
Yeah.
What does that mean? So that means, basically that's cutting.
Yeah.
Right? Which I don't fully understand. I'm certainly no expert in, but it's basically a way to deal with pain. Right. And to get to care for yourself. I'm not going to pretend to be a psychologist here, but you look at the incidence of it and it ramps at 2010, up 5X 2010 to 2020, especially among girls. Boys held flat, but it's girls. So there is something that uniquely affects girls with social media. And I do think the root of it is comparison and having to live up. Yeah,
the chart is pretty stunning. I saw that chart as well in the materials you sent over, and it just, it takes off. And we'll put a link to the data and some of these resources in the show notes because there's, like I said, there's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of resources. Some people try to make counter arguments, right? Well, there's some pros to kids having phones. And I always like looking at the other side of the coin. And it's like, okay, let's go through those, right?
Right.
So, and I'm sure you guys hear this and we'll talk about what y'all do and y'all's mission and what y'all have been up to in the community. But what are the arguments that you guys hear in favor of? No, we need to give high school kids or middle school kids phones and have at it on social media.
Yeah. The biggest argument is everyone else has one, right? The kids are saying that to their parents, but the parents will say that to each other as well.
Right.
So it is there's a guy named Jonathan Haidt who we'll mention later who's written a book and done a lot of studies on this. But he talks about this. It's a collective action problem. Yeah. Everyone gets a phone because everyone gets a phone. And everyone gets social media because everyone gets social media. And part of what we're trying to do is figure out a way to stop that. And we think we have an answer on that, which we'd love to tell you about. But I think it's also, so it's one, everybody should have one because everyone else has one. Mm-hmm. The other reason is they say, well, okay, after sports in middle school, how will they let me know when they're ready to come home? Right. For me, the simple answer to that is, everyone up until the early 2000s figured out a way to get home after sports. Right. Like we all did. There's also phones. You can't throw a rock and not hit a phone. So there's phones everywhere. The kids can do that.
Can never be that far from a phone.
Those are the two that come to mind for me that are arguments against. Also safety. Some of that is, I would say it's the parents' fear that's driving that. Yep. The idea that, well, if my kid is out there and can't get a hold of me, if something bad happens to them, then how will I feel about that? Yeah,
I've heard the school shooting argument.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like if there's a school shooting, I want to know that my kid's okay. And I've heard experts weigh in on that and say, no, we do not want parents calling kids' phones and having their phones chirping when they're in a situation like that.
Right.
That's the last thing that we want. We want them following one set of directions, and we don't want them distracted, and we don't want them getting, don't want a shooter getting notified of where these targets might be.
Right.
So you can throw out that argument pretty quickly. And the school obviously has notification systems built into the sauce by now. I mean, when they do a snow day, I get like a text, an email, a phone call, and and a guy shows up at my door basically.
Yeah.
I understand that argument, and I'm probably even a little sympathetic towards it because we had that happen with our oldest. There was a lockdown one time at school, and I did get a text from him. So and he said, I mean, it was basically like, hey, we're here. We've got books. We're ready to jump out the window. We're ready to attack whoever comes in the door. I mean, it was a little intense. But would I have been okay without knowing that? Yeah, of course, because not 5 minutes later, the school sent out a all clear. It was a misunderstanding.
Right.
Yes.
So I understand this desire as a parent to know your kid's okay, but that also is just the perception of control. It's not actually control. Right. Like, I mean, it'll just make you feel hearing better. From your kid,
make you feel better about yourself.
May make you feel better for a few minutes, but it doesn't affect the outcome of that situation.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and you run the risk of adding a lot more chaos to the situation if all the kids are texting their parents and they're panicking and they're telling them different things. Not to mention, if they're on their phone, they're not fully engaged with what's going on, and they may need to be doing something to be safe or something. Like they really need to be focused on the situation and not communication with the outside world.
Yeah, I completely agree. The other thing I hear from like the economists, the psychologists, super smart people, is like this whole like correlation causation issue. And we see this all the time, like in the law, people make these kinds of arguments all the time. But they say, okay, yes, it looks like the data showing increases in depression, anxiety, self-harm. But that doesn't mean that that's caused by variable A, in this case, social media and cell phones. Maybe it's caused by a bunch of other stuff. So like these two things are correlated doesn't mean one's causing the other. And unless you can properly diagnose a problem, you can't fix it. But that argument, to me, it kind of reminds me of like the food industry. Like you hear that argument sometimes too. Like, well, you can't prove in a double-blind, placebo-controlled test that processed food or seed oils is causing you to get sick or fat or whatever. And until you can do that, let's just not do anything. Let's like allow it. Let's just allow everything. And to me, it's just a ridiculous argument because what else explains the fact that this stuff started ramping up the exact same time that we're seeing phones and social media ramp up, and that it's particularly impacting young people, right? So I've heard the argument, well, maybe it was people are just upset because of media is kind of angry all the time, or climate change, or all sorts of different arguments. And I'm like, do we think teenagers are really that upset about climate change right now across the board?
They're not.
And so I think the common sense answer is that the phones and the social media are the biggest driver of these big problems. So, Elizabeth and John, what do we do about it?
Well, and I'd just say real quick, I'm a data guy. I'm a financial guy for a living. So you
just look like a data guy. I mean, you're just well dressed.
I got graph paper on my jacket. No, but I mean, what I do for a living, I understand the argument of correlation versus causation.
Yeah.
My favorite example is that it's true that the more bars there are in a town, the more churches there are. So you want to say,
right.
Hey, we'll see all these people go out drinking and then they feel guilty and then they go to church. But the fact is they're both actually correlated to how much money's in a town, not to each other.
Right.
That's my favorite example that I remember from stat class. But in this case, you're never going to have a control group because there are no kids to speak of that don't have phones. So you're never going to get the double-blind study with a control group on this. You have to act based on what you see. And I think you ask any parent of teenagers, and they can tell you can talk about correlation all you want. They see what's going on in the lives of their kids and their kids' friends. And that's certainly where we are. So while I, have an academic respect for the argument, as a parent, I think it's baloney.
Yeah, right. I mean, I can tell you, we see it, not just in our own kids, but you can see the anxiety and the tension. I was at a meeting about a month or so ago where there were parents and children. And I was watching this 13-year-old girl on her phone, and she was on it I could see like she was getting worked up, and she kind of put it down, and then she kind of grabbed it back. I mean, you could see the tension, like the anxiety brewing that, she felt like she was missing out. But then you know, what she saw was kind of didn't really fulfill her, so she picked it up again, and it was just.
Yeah.
I thought
like a salivating dog, just
her heart. Like,
put it down.
I don't need to see any statistics. Like,
No.
we see it. We know a lot of teenagers, and we can see it firsthand.
Or, you know, the situation where you see a group of young people and they are physically present with each other, but they're staring at their phones. And it's like, guys, y'all are missing the gold here. Like, this is your chance to, like, go cut it up, have fun, go mess around, just talk, whatever. And you guys are talking to other people who aren't present with you right now.
That's right.
Yeah, it's so sad. It's so dysfunctional.
It's so real. And it's because, Travis, I think it's because you look at the Stanford, like this all came out of a Stanford psychiatry department way back, like the way that these apps, the phones themselves are designed to biohack. Right? They are highly tuned and designed to keep attention. Right? And we all have talked about dopamine hits and all that, but it's true. Like those phones exploit our natural wiring to keep us overly engaged with them. Right. And that body of work, again, I'm no psychologist, but I've read enough about it to know it's true. Like that all came out of Stanford and it works, right? So, I mean, the colors, the notifications, the haptics, all of that is made to keep you engaged in search of revenue, right? Because it's a revenue model for these companies.
And when you say haptics, that's like the vibrations.
Right. And so there are studies on that, right? That, you know, kids, I'm sure we'll talk more about phones in schools, but if you have a phone in your pocket, right, even if you're not looking at it, just that vibration on your hip or your rear end, like that is enough to distract you enough that your performance academically decreases.
Right.
So just having the phone near you in class
or in your backpack
has been shown in studies to decrease academic performance.
Have you ever had that sensation that your phone was vibrating in your pocket and then you looked and there was nothing? Yes. Just like pretended it was there or whatever?
So weird.
That's creepy.
And maybe that speaks to the biohacking.
Right.
You were talking about people sitting around looking at their phones, not engaging in real life. And so that makes me think of our second kid, which really was the impetus for this movement. So tell you a little about that if you'd like to hear
let's
it.
go.
So our second kid, you know, our first kid, we had basically success. We had other parents, we banded together, and it worked.
Yeah.
Our second kid, who's one of our two daughters, when she was in early middle school, so call it fifth grade,
probably sixth.
Fifth and sixth, like the cat was out of the bag before any parents had discussed it. Girls were getting phones, girls were getting social media, girls were getting, you know, I think at the time TikTok, maybe shortly
TikTok and Instagram
shortly
for sure.
thereafter, if not. And so, you know, and we had told her, like, we had success with your brother, so you're not getting a phone early, and you're certainly not getting social media.
But everyone else
has it.
Yeah.
So we could see him, and she would come home and say, hey, like on the sidelines at sports practice, they're all doing TikTok dances on their phones, and I'm just sitting there watching.
Oh, gosh.
Or if we go out to dinner, they're all on the phones, and I'm just sitting there kind of carved out. So, and then also, so eventually we let her get a phone, but we said no social media. And that was seventh grade for her?
Yeah, mid seventh grade.
Well,
which was earlier than we wanted to give her a phone.
And we told her, we're going to give you a phone, but we're not going to give you social media. And she said, oh, no, that's great. And I said, look, in a month, you're going to be here begging me for social media. No, I promise I won't. Well, I mean, we gave her the phone, and then immediately she's still left out because I've got the device, but now I'm not connected.
Right.
And so the punchline of our second kid experience was we did what we believed was right for the kid.
Yeah.
But effectively, we just cut her out of social communication and that network.
Right.
So we did make it hard for her based on our decisions of what we thought was right.
Oh,
so our big conclusion...
Parenting is hard.
That is hard.
It sure is.
So we looked at the first two kids and we said, all right, what worked with our son was that we had a group of parents.
Yep.
Right? And they were involved. We were all on the same page and we all did the same thing. Like we took away that collective action problem. We took away that argument. Everyone else has it.
Yeah.
Second kid, our daughter, we did what was right by us, but it didn't work because it just cut her out.
So if a parent's listening to this and they say, well, I'm fine, I got this all figured out because I'm not going to let my kid have a phone until 16 or whatever. What is the movement now? What are y'all doing? And I assume the goal is getting parents to band together early. Right. So tell me about the project.
So about 3 years ago with our youngest, at this point, we're kind of the older parents who don't really care what anybody thinks.
Yeah.
And we've also...
Which is my favorite kind of people.
And we also, beyond the shadow of a doubt, we're completely 100% convinced that holding off on social media as long as you possibly can is the way to go.
Yep.
Just delay. So we got really gutsy and we decided to reach out to all the parents in our daughter's grade. And that was about 85 or 90 families. And we do not do things like that. We do not take the directory and try to sell things to people. Like, this was a really big move for us, but we felt so strongly about it that we decided, we emailed all the parents in her grade and said, hey, we are going to have a discussion. John and I have been down this road. This is not our first rodeo. We have learned a whole lot about phones and social media. We would like to invite you to a discussion. Our experience is that the negatives outweigh the positives as far as social media goes. And we're going to discuss, and our goal would be to have a group that moves forward through middle school without social media. There were already quite a few kids who had smartphones. So we sort of missed the boat on the phone thing, but we decided to tackle the social media aspect of it.
Okay.
And so we sent out this email, just kind of thought, what have we just done? You know, this is kind of scary. And then the responses started coming in, and it was unbelievable. Like 60% of the parents in the grade said, we are on board with you.
Yeah, let's do this.
We want to do this with you. We are committed. And it took off. And we would meet every 6 months to kind of keep it. You kind of have to keep it it has to be a real group. You know, you can't just say it once, and you have to keep talking about it. So we brought in a psychiatrist to one of our talks, Brian Dixon. He was fantastic. We brought in a teenage panel, which was incredibly enlightening.
Tell me about that. Like you have kids coming up talking about how they wish they didn't have social media, or they're glad they didn't have it.
It was mostly 17-year-olds, and that was kind of on purpose. We really kind of wanted older teens because they tend to be a little more reflective about how it's all affected them. They're not able to be reflective about how it's affecting them when they're 13 or 14. Yeah. They're just too young. But when they're 17, they can say, you know, first of all, a lot of them said thank you to their parents for making them hold off until they were maybe in 8th or 9th grade for whatever, the phone or the social media. And they could say, you know, I can see why my parents did this now. It really helped me. I didn't like it at the time, but looking back, it really helped me. And a lot of them had made kind of some of their own kind of rules about how they would and wouldn't use their phones and social media. They realized that it just sucks them down this hole that they don't want to go down. And they don't like that. You know, they don't like that it pulls them away from so much else.
I would also add that having a panel of 17, 18-year-olds speaking to parents of 5th and 6th graders is extremely eye-opening. Yeah. Right? Because especially if it's your first kid who's your 5th or 6th grader and you haven't lived this yet, when you hear 17, 18-year-olds talking about people sharing nudes, people sexting, people sharing pictures they shouldn't of each other, people, coordinating drugs, people all the things that happen with tech.
Sexual predators.
Blows their mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Definitely. So it does. I think that kind of that really catalyzes the thoughts of the young parents. Okay, this is real, and we've got to get on this because these are good, solid kids we have on these panels, and their experience is just making it very real. That there's really no escape from where this is headed, barring a decision to withhold it.
So to have success. Because you don't need the whole grade, right? You just need a chunk, right? You need a group. You
need a big chunk, though.
You need a big chunk.
The more, the merrier.
Right.
Yeah. And if you can get boy parents and girl parents to do it together, that's even better. Because what we had with our first child was just a group of boy parents, boy families, and the girls were getting all the things before the boys were, and that was kind of making it a little harder for the boys. They were kind of wanting it because they thought, the girls all have this, right? We want it too. So that's kind of one of the different approaches we took the third time.
There's a real practical thing there on the number, though, because there is this tipping point effect. And that is especially when they start getting Snapchat, right? So Snap, we could talk for 30 minutes about Snap, but in a nutshell, it's a messaging system, right? They can text on it, they send pictures on it, and then they do this thing where they have Snap streaks, which is just sending a goofy picture of yourself back and forth, but the app incents you to keep doing it. I mean, to somebody who doesn't use it, it sounds ridiculous, but there were people in our son's grade that had hundreds of thousands of like streaks on this, meaning they had sent pictures to dozens of people every day for years.
Wow.
And so it becomes this game. But okay, the things we don't like most about Snap are that it's made for images to disappear. So it is designed for sexting or being secretive. Also, the texts can disappear. But here's the kicker. The text interface apparently is really, I should say messaging interface is really good. Like it's well designed. The kids, that is to say the kids love it.
Right.
So what happens is when a critical mass of kids gets on Snap, the messaging in the grade shifts from iMessage, usually at least at the schools we're talking about, most of them had iPhones.
They're using Snapchat.
They use iMessage. Yeah, it'll shift to that. So there really is this idea. I think it's somewhere around 30 or 40%. Once they get to that number of them on Snapchat, then they disappear. So now you're running, and they're not going to send a text to their friends on Snap and then a text to their friends on iMessage. It just shifts. So there is this idea, I think, of if you can delay that, then you kind of keep it on iMessage. And as a parent, you can monitor what's happening on iMessage. You can't see what's happening on Snap because it can disappear.
Gotcha.
Snap is a whole lot of information for a young teenager. It is, I mean, you can at any point, and like I said, these kids will end up having like 500 friends on these platforms just in a matter of days. It does not take long. But they will be able to see where every single one of those friends is at all times. It is just...
Unless the friends... there is a feature where you can go in ghost mode. And you can turn it off.
Yeah, you can go in ghost mode.
Most of them don't do that.
But it's just a lot of information to process. Like you really... Their world should not be that big and that complicated. It's too much noise. It's just too much input for them. I think it's overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, it's like parents, it's important to understand like the amount of information that these kids are having access to. Like knowing where every kid in your grade is, like you said, the Snap maps or whatever. You know, it'd be like me, like knowing that like those 4 guys went and played golf and they didn't invite me. And those guys went to lunch, and I didn't get a call on that.
Right.
And those guys are doing a Bible study, and no one invited them. Like, imagine like knowing all the time, every time people got together, and you weren't invited.
Right.
And that's what's happening to our young kids with this stuff.
Yep. And I think it's especially hard on the girls.
It's especially hard on the girls. So what age would you start grouping these? You know, doing these initiatives, like encouraging people to start reaching out to fellow parents?
I think maybe starting in about 2nd grade. I think you start getting the parents together to start talking.
Right.
Yeah. Does that relate? Does that hit home?
I think you knew why I asked that question. Yeah, our oldest is a 2nd grader, and you're starting to hear some talks about it. So let me ask you this: when y'all did your last push, when you just blasted out the entire grade, was that before or after the Anxious Generation book came out?
Before. Yeah.
Before. So I imagine the pitch is a little bit easier now, or is it not? With now that we have more data and the book is kind of taken off.
Yes. I think there are a couple things that have really helped our cause. I mean, we've been into this now for several years, but Vivek Murphy's, the Surgeon General's, report about the danger of social media and the effect on youth mental health was huge. And he had a great study that they supported, and with some really convincing statistics that are being used by many different entities. So I think that was a really big thing for this discussion. And then also the timing of the Anxious Generation. The book came out, I think, March 2024.
And we haven't really mentioned that yet, but that is a great piece of work for anybody interested in this who wants to go deeper.
What did that, at a high level, John, what did that book?
He basically, he makes a few arguments. One is that he just makes a compelling argument with data that this is harming kids.
Yeah. And
there are people who take the other side, but I think generally he makes a solid argument. He also talks a lot about, what schools should do. Mm-hmm. We have thoughts on that. We can definitely get into that. But I actually think the tide's turning there a little bit. Yep. Schools and even some whole countries are moving to not have smartphones in the classroom or even during the school day, because they've seen there is an academic decrease with it. Mm-hmm. I think schools are also learning that technology is not the best way to learn every lesson, right? Like
iPads
and our oldest was doing middle school math or algebra on an iPad.
Yeah, how do you do that?
It's ridiculous. And so we have seen the schools shift away back to pencil and paper, because I think there's something tactile about writing and as far as submitting things in your mind. And I don't think iPads are great for that. So we're seeing schools move away. But then his most important point, I think, is basically like if you're going to take something away, right, which would be tech, then you have to replace it with something. Mm-hmm. It's like nature abhors a vacuum. So if you're going to take this off, what are you going to replace it with? And he would argue real life, real world, real responsibility, interactions, talking with family, going and exploring the neighborhood.
Yeah.
The nutshell of that book is that we've underprotected kids in the digital world and we've overprotected them in the real world.
In the physical world.
And we love that idea. So we have lots of ideas about how to engage in real life with kids.
I mean, when I think about my own childhood, like my fondest memories, it was playing outside in the dirt.
Right.
Sometimes it was a sports thing, but most of the time it was just like go play, in the creek, go play in the yard, go camping, that kind of stuff. And I can't imagine not having that because that's been a foundation, for me forever. Like that's a love of the outdoors and love all this kind of stuff that I now pass to my kids. And I can't imagine if someone took that away from me. It's like you have TikTok now instead.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right. Yeah. The skills gained in just free play, just autonomy and self-advocacy and just getting along with people and also being creative. Kids are really good at finding things to do when they're bored. Sometimes we don't give them enough credit and we hand them an iPad. Right. But they are really, if you give them, like you said, if you give them a bunch of dirt and some sticks, they're going to have a good time.
Yeah, I do think there's a big lie there, especially if speaking to younger parents, that giving a young kid an iPad is somehow educational.
Oh, yeah.
It is a form of passive learning, but it is nothing like active learning. The mind is engaged differently when a kid is, even if they're doing some spelling program or simple math on an iPad, that is not as good as playing with blocks. But
if you're on a long flight with a little kid, an iPad's okay, right, John?
We absolutely. So our rule growing up was if the car trip was over 2 hours.
Right.
It was 3.5.
Okay, 3.5. They could watch a movie.
Yeah.
So we did, but short of that, we would make them either read or
sing songs with us.
Travel
kids.
bingo. Or,
we sometimes did sing.
Clark
songs.
Griswold song singing. Yeah.
We did Mad Libs. Sometimes they just stared out the window. Yeah. And that's okay too.
That's okay too.
The kids need downtime. They need their brains just need to observe and process their world around them. And I think a lot of kids are not getting that time. Kids learn so much through observation. Yeah. And it's in the times of, when their minds are quiet, when they're really processing and exploring, and they need more of that.
And we have been blessed with kids who are good students. But I do think part of that is because they all read voraciously when they were young. Right. And they read voraciously because we didn't give them much tech.
Oh.
Right.
So they did it old school, right? They read stories.
Yeah. If you want to entertain yourself, you can go read about anything you want to. And
right.
Exactly. Just don't wake me up.
I can't say this enough. Like when we have 4 little kids, y'all's kids are a little bit older. When we meet families like yours where the kids are just rock stars, it's just like, okay, I want to sit down. I want to talk to you. I want to know everything that you did. And it's so cool that you guys are sharing this experience, and especially with the social media and the phone thing, because that's obviously the biggest problem now. Y'all went the other way with it. Your kids are amazing.
Well, thank you. That's kind.
Thank you.
But, this would be a good place to say we're not anti-technology.
Right.
Right. We are pro real and deep life.
It's good for listening to podcasts.
Absolutely. Hey, and at work, I rely on tech at work, and we use AI at work, and so I'm a technophile.
Yeah.
But as far as my kids go,
right,
if I'm seeing something that's harmful to them, I'm going to limit it, and I'm going to replace it with something better.
Yeah, and that doesn't make you a hypocrite to use tech, to enjoy tech, and see the benefits of tech, and say, but my kid just isn't ready for this yet.
Absolutely.
Guardrails.
I look at it like a tool, right?
Yeah.
And the more powerful the tool, the more responsibility required.
Right.
Right. So I would never hand a kid a power saw and say, have fun learning to cut wood.
Right.
Or I'd never hand them a shotgun and say, go figure out how to hunt.
Right.
Right. Like I would teach them step by step, and then I would have scaffolding around them that I slowly remove. Right. And I think it's the same with technology.
So extending that, when you do ultimately hand the kid a phone for the first time, is it your advice to then limit social media? Like, is it staggered? Like, okay, let's say we're going to wait till 16 for smartphones. Can we hand kids a phone at 16, but then block the social media part of it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would encourage that. I think there's enough to learn just with a smartphone. A smartphone in itself can be a very addictive device.
Yeah.
Just with the texting And the camera, oh boy. I mean, I could spend a whole hour talking about my thoughts about cell phone cameras, but I think, especially for girls, like, talk about a distraction. Like the cell phone camera may be one of the worst things that's ever happened to teenage girls, because they take pictures of themselves and they take pictures of each other. So all that to say, to answer your question, Travis, is that I think it's a really good idea to not give them the social media accounts right away, to give them the phone, let them figure out how to manage that. Also, you want them to demonstrate that they're responsible with the phone before they get the social media accounts.
Yeah. I
would say, stagger those things, maybe 2 years if you could.
Right.
Just depending on how old they are when they get the smartphone.
And to be clear, though, I mean, I like the idea of no smartphones till 16. We haven't done that. I mean, our kids usually got smartphones in middle school, but they were absolutely locked down. And we've not done social media.
They didn't even have browsers on them.
True.
So they were very limited in what they could do on the phone.
Because if they have a browser, they could get to something. Right. Even if they don't have the app, they could get to Instagram.com or whatever.
Absolutely.
And would also say, like, through middle school, like, just iMessage can become a real distraction, especially for girls. Right. So if it's kind of like even handing a bunch of girls in the grade lockdown iPads, I mean, you will get massive text chains and you get hurt feelings and you get, the whole drama of, well, so-and-so removed me from the group and then so-and-so put me back in. I mean, it turns into this pecking order. And I would just say generally, like general comment, technology is a catalyst, right? So if middle school girls are insecure and going to be catty and going to, be bickering, it's just a catalyst that accelerates
stoking that flame.
If middle school boys have an unhealthy interest in pornography or anything, it accelerates that. So whatever it's just going faster.
Yeah. 9 to, and Jonathan Haidt talks about this in his book, but 9 to 14 is called like a sensitive period, and they are highly impressionable.
Yeah.
And they are more concerned about what their peers think than at any other time in their life. And this is when we are handing them devices that where they compare themselves to 500 people every single day. Mm-hmm. Like it makes absolutely no sense. Whereas if you can wait until, you have a 16, 17, 18-year-old, they are so much more equipped to handle the social media accounts.
They're more interested in being themselves, right? In middle school, the primary goal is I want to be like everybody else. I don't want to stand out. And by the time they're getting through high school, then they're kind of becoming okay with who they are. Yeah. And they're okay with being a little different.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So back to your original question, yes. We would absolutely limit social media when we would give a device. And this is a call for parents here a little bit. Handing a kid, like going to the Apple store or wherever and buying a phone and handing it to a kid, it's looked at like a rite of passage. Some people will do it for birthdays. Like we would say, don't make a big deal out of that. Don't make it a birthday present. Don't even make it their phone. So you're an attorney, you may appreciate this. I mean, we drew up a contract with our kids. Uh-huh. Simple language contract, but it had the ideas in there that were key, which this device belongs to your parents. Mm-hmm. We can check anything we want on it. We always have to know your passcodes. I will not look at anything on this phone that I wouldn't look at if my grandmother were sitting next to me. Mm-hmm. And they have to initial every line and sign off at the bottom.
We refer back to it. And I think it also says some things like this does not take the place of real conversations, real friendships. Like we expect you to, engage with the real world.
If it becomes a problem, it will be taken away. Just lay out the ground rules where they understand it's not theirs.
So have you ever seen one of your kids, even after they sign this contract, staring at their phone while they should be talking to a friend or something like that?
Sure.
Absolutely.
But it makes it easier to call them on it.
Yeah.
We can see right here in writing.
And here's another thing, you have to give yourself some grace as a parent. Totally. Like you are not going to win every single battle with technology. It's it's too big. And so I say that to be encouraging because there have definitely been days when we're like, oh my gosh, our kids were on devices way too much today. Like, let's talk to them. Let's do better tomorrow. Like whatever the situation is. And you just have to say, okay, I'm not going to win every single battle, but I'm going to win this war and I'm not going to give up. Just because we had a bad day or a bad week doesn't mean we're not going to keep trying.
That's a great
And you got to give some grace to your kids, right? Yeah. So they're going to screw up. And you don't want to, now we're getting into parenting advice, but like the key there is the relationship, right? Yeah. So we have all these rules, but at the end of the day, they know we're on their team. And we always tell them, you may not agree with our decisions,
right,
but we want you to know we're doing them because we love you and we think that's what's right.
Right.
And so maintaining open dialogue. And so when they stumble across something they shouldn't on the internet, which they will, having them know that you're not going to come down hard on them. You come to me and let's talk about it. Let's learn from it. Let me help you. Right. And maintaining that line of communication is way more important than trying to control everything.
Right. You cannot give a child a cell phone or even an iPad without them making mistakes. I mean, you know, I circle back with our daughters. Our oldest is, you know, he's out of the nest now, but I circled back with our daughters not too long ago, and I said, you know, if you ever see something you shouldn't, say something you shouldn't, send something you shouldn't, you need to come talk to us because, like John said, we're on your team.
Yeah.
We're going to help you through this. That doesn't mean there might not be some consequence if you did something really stupid, but you're going to need our help because the most tragic situations are when you have, and this happens with girls a lot of times, like somebody reaches out to them, they want a naked picture. The girl sends it, and then they start to threaten the girl. Well, I'm going to send this to everybody, or I'm going to, you know, and the child panics, and they're embarrassed, they're ashamed, they're afraid to talk to their parents. Those, if you look into a lot of the tragic situations, there's a story somewhere kind of like that.
Yeah.
And so we just over and over again just say, you know, come to us when you've screwed up. You know, we are on your team.
There is nothing, you know, it's that old message. There's nothing you can do that will make me love you any less.
Right.
Like that doesn't mean there's no consequence, but like come and tell us, let us help you.
We try not to overreact. We try to be calm.
Some of us are better than others at it.
Depends on what it is. Sometimes you're more calm. Sometimes I'm more calm. Just depends.
Yeah. No, you guys are great. I mean, I'm reading a book right now. It talks about that, about maintaining that line with your kids, that relationship where they can come to you with anything. There might be consequences. Like, just being honest, there might be consequences. There might even be some punishment, some sort. But I'm not going to condemn you. I'm not going to love you any less for it. You know, I've heard stories of young boys too, who get in compromising positions, and then they get basically, you know, leverage to start paying money or sending more compromising pictures, and it just spirals out of control.
Right.
And if we could just nip that in the bud in the beginning.
Absolutely.
Right.
So like the biggest thing, if you could wave a magic wand and say like this, like 80-20 principle, like this one thing will chip away at a big chunk of the problem. Would you say it's no social media until 16?
That's a great question. I would actually say that it is knowing you can't do it alone. Right. The key here is you have to do this in a group. A group problem necessitates a group solution.
Yeah.
So I would say that because we've tried just not giving the tools and the apps to a kid, and by herself, that didn't work. So that was the learn. That's the biggest aha here is you got to have a group.
Yeah.
And so you got to be purposeful about forming that group and then kind of stepping in the way with that group to solve a collective problem.
Yeah. And I think having the confidence that when you guys reached out to the entire grade, it was before the stuff was a big topic, before all the data was out, and you still had a massive chunk of the parents' response, hey, I'm in, this is the right thing to do. They just know it, and they're good as parents.
Right.
You know, so parents should have confidence. If they do that email blast now, I assume there's a lot of resources that they could attach to that email. Is there a place, do you guys have those resources kind of readily available for people to use?
We do, yeah. So we created, just after we'd built this group with our youngest and had all these meetings and everything, we created some templates that other people can use. And that's all on our website, which is socialmediacanwait.org.
Awesome.
And, you know, anybody can go there. It's free. You know, just even from like the first email, if you wanted to send an email out to a group of parents, like it gives ideas for how to do that.
Okay.
Actual text and copy, you know, anybody can copy paste. Like we want it to be used by people. We want it to be useful.
And really, yeah, and a little more of the story, like we got to where we are organically. And we did this with our grade, and there were a few parents of younger kids that said, hey, I heard what you're doing. Will you come talk to our grade? And so we just went and sat down and talked to them at someone's house. And then somebody else said, oh, well, you need to come talk to this group. So it's just kind of snowballed from there to where we now speak to groups at different schools and different parents. And what's encouraged me is two things. One is the kids' ages of the parents who are coming. So we're seeing a lot of 2nd and 3rd grade parents who are fired up to stay out in front of this.
Right.
And I think that's fantastic. And that may sound funny to some listeners that you need to care about this in 2nd or 3rd grade, but it happens fast.
Oh, I'm going to send the email this afternoon. Yeah. You guys have got my attention.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not just about the phones. It really is about the iPads, and it's about everything. You know,
I'm glad you said that.
You really have to begin with the end in mind, is what we say when we talk to parents at different schools. Like, you know, the parent who hands their child a phone in the grocery store at age 3 to entertain themselves is going to have a really hard time convincing that child that they don't need a smartphone until they're 16. Mm-hmm. Like, you want to keep them engaging with the real world as much as possible from the very youngest of ages. You know, iPads, everybody thinks iPads are so sweet, and no, you can access all kinds of stuff on an iPad. And you're even if your child is watching content that is, you know, educational, they can still spend a few hours a day at the tender age of 5 or 6 in a dark room on an iPad at the expense of them not being outside or not having a friend over to play. So
and this might be a good place too to mention it is imperative and incumbent on parents to understand controls on these devices. And that is, even as someone who loves tech, it's hard to do. I mean, the tech companies have not made it. They try, but it's not super easy. Even on Apple, it's a little buggy. But understanding parental controls, screen time controls, you know, there's what's the name of the website that we've recommended?
Protect Young Eyes.
Yeah, so Protect Young Eyes has a good list of tech resources on on basically how to lock down an iPhone, how to lock down an iPad. We locked down our Wi-Fi network at our house. We used a product called Umbrella or OpenDNS, where it basically that's just blocking kind of website level traffic. It doesn't filter content as much, like, so YouTube is either on or off. That's a hard one, but it definitely like blocks a lot of bad sites. And then there's a setting on iPhones called limit adult content. Like, that has to be on. But what you have to understand on all these as a parent is how to set that up where the kids can't undo it. Right. And so it requires, you know, and if you're not a technophile, then make an appointment at the Genius Bar. If you can't figure out reading the instructions yourself at the Apple Store. But you have to own that. You can't just hand a kid an unlocked phone and trust that they're going to be a good kid. Like, that's just because this stuff comes looking for them as much as they come looking for it.
Yeah.
Another just simple thing to do is make it where they can't install an app without your permission, and they can't ever delete an app without your permission.
Right.
And they know they can't hide anything on the phone. But those are just small examples. There's a lot there. Protect Young Eyes is a good resource that's probably worth putting in the show notes as well.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it just kind of sounds like a game of whack-a-mole, though. Like, there's always going to be some workarounds. Like, there's always going to be some new app or some bug or feature to get around stuff.
Yes.
I mean, for example,
it's true.
this is a true story. So let's talk about schools for a second.
Sure.
So school issued devices, right? So parents can like band together all they want, but at some schools now, a lot of schools now, eventually it's school issued iPads in whatever, middle school. There was a presentation at our school. An expert came in talking about, and it was kind of more of the sexual predator kind of stuff, this super scary stuff. And she was like, one of these apps to look for is like this app this game where kids are playing a game, but there's like, it's like one of those like kind of virtual reality. I don't know how to describe it. Like, you're a person in the game and you're going around the world and you're going around room to room.
Maybe Roblox or Minecraft.
Yes, Roblox. Yeah. Watch out for Roblox because predators are in there too, and they're talking to your kid in there. I'm like, okay, I've never heard of Roblox, whatever. Next day, I'm in the school cafeteria hanging out with my kids, and I see like slightly bigger kids playing that very game on the school issued iPad that I've been told is controlled and locked down and all this stuff. I'm like, well, maybe it is, but this seems scary. Like, what's going on here? Are school issued iPads a problem?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I still am not convinced why we ever had school-issued iPads. You know, some people will say, well, my child needs to know how to use technology. Okay, well, if you watch a child use their iPad, you could figure out in 5 minutes how to use that iPad. So they're not learning, they're not any, you know, tech skills they're learning just using the iPad. So that that argument doesn't hold water.
That was in Apple's original tagline for marketing the iPad was, "You already know how to use it."
Yeah,
exactly.
It's so intuitive.
So it's a no-brainer. So unless your child is learning like coding or something, like just the simple iPad is very easy to use. A 5-year-old can learn how to use it in 5 minutes. So then you have to look at, well, are they learning better from an iPad? And I mean, I've done a lot of research. I could spout off some stats, but out of Indiana University, they did a study where they were tracking brain activity, kids writing letters on paper versus typing on an iPad. The amount of brain activity is just exponentially higher if they're writing pen on paper or pencil on paper. There was a study about 4th graders learning. The ones who learned most of their classwork was on an iPad, scored 14 points lower on tests than the kids who were using almost no iPads.
Right.
So the traditional kind of analog, however you want to call it, methods of learning are absolutely the better ways to learn.
Yeah.
And not to mention, not only are we learning that the iPads aren't a great way to learn, but they're also a barrier, basically, and you saw that in the school cafeteria. They're a barrier between that child and the real world.
Right.
They are going to hide, and we've talked to teenagers about this, and they've looked back on their middle school experience, and they've said, I finished my classwork, and instead of picking up a book to read or doing my homework, I got my iPad out and I started playing games.
Right.
That is not what you want to hear from your child who you're sending off to school, private or public. You're sending that child to school trusting that they are going to learn.
Right.
You do not want to hear that they're getting really good at Roblox. Right. You want to know that they're in the cafeteria talking to friends and working on social connections and talking about the weekend.
We're watching Netflix. That's the newest one we've heard.
Oh, yeah.
One of the schools our kids go to that will remain unmentioned. But you would hope that the Wi-Fi networks at these schools are blocking unnecessary things. But one of our kids has told us after school, people are watching Netflix at school.
Not after school, during school.
Yeah, or shopping at Lululemon.
And I heard, and shopping at Lululemon. That was one that we were really excited about.
We would, I do think there's a role for tech in education. There are some things like, I don't know, looking at a 3D model of DNA or something, right? That would be better. Yeah. Or you could rotate it, look at it, understand. So I'm not going to say that tech isn't better in some things, but I think there are very few. Yep. And our son did AP computer science and took 3 years. So, I'm all for learning to code and learning tech, but that's not an equivalent to getting an iPad in middle school, right? So there's definitely room there to pull it back a little bit. And I think the data is beginning to indicate that.
Yeah. I saw global academic test scores. Mm-hmm. This is one of those charts and the stuff that jumps off the page too, declining.
Right.
Yes.
Our kids are getting dumber.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The UN did a report, and they do a global education report, and in that it actually was talking about pulling back on smartphones because they were seeing a decrease in academic performance.
Yeah, across the board.
And you can just,
math, English, everything.
I quote studies because a lot of people put their faith there. Again, I don't need those studies because I've seen it in my own kids and their friends.
Right.
That their academic performance absolutely goes down. Just like my performance goes down at work if you're mess around on Twitter all day.
Yeah.
It takes discipline. And I think part of it is we know that the kids don't have that discipline at that age. So we're going to help them build up to that.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing, we're realistic. We don't want to send our kids, when our kids turn 18, they're going to be running their own program.
Right.
We're probably paying for college, but short of that, we want them to be launch ready, as you said.
Yeah.
And so, again, back to that scaffolding idea, right? We put this scaffolding around them to help make them strong. But then as they get older, before they graduate, we're taking that down. Mm-hmm. And we're not going to send them off to college with a lockdown iPhone. They have to own it at some point.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
So there is this role of protecting, right, as a parent. Mm-hmm. But it's also mentoring and helping them grow to where they can protect themselves. Mm-hmm. And we've seen success with that. Some of our son who's off, his phone screen a lot of times is black and white because that's, back to the biohacking. If you turn off the colors, it's not nearly as interesting. Uh-huh. So, he actually has a black and white iPhone because it helps him study more.
And I think he's turned off all his notifications.
Right. So, we help them get to that, but we want to protect them early. We want to teach them in the middle, and we want to give them the internal motivation to manage it themselves before they leave.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like the way we teach them anything, like you said, with the power tools or with, skiing, with riding a bike, like we start here and we're going to work our way up. We've got to have that same mindset with these tech devices. And I think that the iPad thing in schools is really interesting too. Like, I don't know about y'all, but I could read something on a screen and then at the very end of that, I'm like, what did I just read? Sometimes it's like, it's just hard to focus when you're staring at lights. So I print out, I'm a lawyer, I read for a living. So I still have to print out stuff and mark it up and do all those kinds of things if I'm going to retain that information. And I assume the same applies for a lot of kids in these schools.
Absolutely. And you're seeing it from the teachers agreeing as well. I mean, when you look at surveys, most teachers agree that it's a distraction.
Have you seen schools that have gone device free? And what are they saying about it?
We haven't personally seen any.
Well, I've been reading up on it though. A lot of the East Coast boarding schools have now have cell phone restrictions where there are no cell phones, like not only in academic classes but also in shared spaces like assemblies, cafeteria, things like that. And even if you're walking down the path, like in between classes or whatever, you have to get off the path if you're going to use your phone. Like, they want those shared spaces to really be about engagement. Because think about it, these boarding schools are over 100 years old, some of them. They have worked so hard to build this community. Right. And they started to see their community threatened by the cell phones because the kids were just not engaging with each other, engaging with their teachers. Richardson ISD, just 40 miles down the road, also has a very strict no cell phone in the classroom policy. The students actually check in their phones each morning with a Yondr pouch, if you've seen those. And it's very strict. Like, I think you get one warning. The second offense, you actually have all day in school suspension. Wow. So they are taking it very seriously. And that's a fairly sizable district.
Yeah, we have seen some victories personally. Elizabeth and some other moms encouraged the leadership at one of our schools to get rid of phones and iPads on the school grade field trips. So that, like field trips, they would go to Austin or San Antonio or Big Bend and just no phones on that. And the feedback from our kids was that it was great. Like, it was just nice to unplug.
Yeah. That's good advice, like, for parents who are, if you want to go talk to your schools, like, it's going to be hard to go from, like, everyone's got a phone to, like, phone-free complete ban, but you can go get some wins, like start with field trips or passing periods or like in the lunchroom, or from this time to this time there's going to be no phones out. Just go get some little wins and then get that data and talk to the 2 months later, how did this go? Do people like it or not? Chances are they're going to like it,
right?
And then you can go get
a little
some
bit
more
at a
wins.
time.
Some advice we've learned there that I'd give would be, a lot of people want to talk to teachers about it, and teachers are usually on our side, right?
Yeah.
But it's a policy. So then people maybe want to talk to the division heads or, principals of the middle school or high school. In our experience, it's really, to drive change here, it really is a board issue, at least in private schools, because principals generally don't want to rock the boat, right? Because half the probably not half, but some of the parents are going to disagree. So they just why am I going to wade into this? So we have actually seen any change that has happened usually is from influence at the board level. And a lot of times
in conjunction with the head of school.
Yeah.
But Richardson ISD, that's a public school district. So,
so that's got to be school board.
Is that coming from that school board?
Yes.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Well, good for them.
I know. Good for them.
Perhaps other school districts around the state, around the country, can look to Richardson and the boarding schools on the East Coast. I've seen some schools up in Seattle, public schools that are doing similar things with those little pouches.
And then there are entire countries that are making this push. The United Kingdom, France. There are countries out there that are moving in this direction. Because think about what we spend globally on education.
Right.
It's a shocking amount of money, right? And so if we know that we're not getting as good a return on our dollars spent if we're letting kids be zoned out during the day.
Are you saying the U.S. education system is not the cream of the crop?
It is in terms of dollars per pupil.
Okay.
But it's not in terms of outcome.
Right.
Yeah, we all have the same goal. We all want to launch resilient, strong, world-ready kids when they're 18. We just need to all realize we need to come together and figure out, at what ages and stages should they be able to interface with these various technologies so that they can be their best and healthiest versions of themselves.
But one thing I would say, Travis, that I think is real important is all along we've said it's tempting to make this a school issue. Mm-hmm. It's tempting to make this a tech company issue. And it's tempting to make this a legislative issue. Mm-hmm. And I do think all of those are important approaches. But for us, we decided what is critical is to make this a parenting issue. Mm-hmm. So if you want to engage with the legislature or with the tech companies or with the schools, that's great. But I don't think you can count on them. And I think those, if anything, are long-term changes. Right. Where you can have the biggest impact in the lives of your kids is by being a good parent. And so that is really where we came down on, let's own this problem ourselves and our family. And then what we realized real quickly was we need other families to be involved too.
Get other good parents too.
Right.
Well, that's great. You guys are awesome. Appreciate what you guys are doing. Thanks for coming on the show. I think this is a really important message. I hope people share it and listen to it. If people want more information about y'all's cause, it's socialmediacanwait.org.
Correct.
And they can reach out to you. Are you guys still on the speaker circuit? Will y'all come speak at local schools, local community groups?
Absolutely. We will. We'd love to.
Free of charge. Just because you guys are awesome. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else we forgot to talk about? Video games. Kids are spending way too much time on video games.
Wow.
But I think that's obvious.
I think I may need to say something about that real quick, though. The average young man spends 10,000 hours playing video games.
10,000 hours?
10,000 hours from the time he's like about 6 to 21. So that's almost 2 years of waking days.
Oh my gosh. That is like the definition, right,
days.
of how long it takes to become an expert at something, right? That's from
is that right?
From Gladwell, yeah.
Gladwell and the Beatles, 10,000 hours playing for nobody. They became expert musicians.
And,
that's good. We have expert video game players.
We do. We have a whole lot of expert video game players. And the scary thing is, if you divide that out over, say, 15 years, it ends up only being about 2 hours a day. So it's really easy to see how that could happen. But I think the thing to really think about is we have a lot of young men, especially. I'm sure I know there are girls who play video games as well, but they are not out in the world enough. And they're not gaining those skills they need to leave the house. They're at home a whole lot more than they used to, and they're a lot more passive. These are not across the board statements, but it definitely is a problem, the video games, just in terms of young people just being at home, holed up, not getting out there and learning the skills for self-advocacy and just everything you need to be adulting.
Yeah, I mean, on that front, we're seeing a delay in young people. Let's call it early 20s, wanting to go out into the world, wanting to go get married, wanting to be intimate with a partner. Like we're seeing delays and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah, Gen Z is less likely to be interested in getting married, less likely to be interested in kids, and even less interested in sex. Which that's like. It's never happened like in the history of humanity.
That's how powerful
this stuff is. And I think a lot of it is also that at a young age, they may have seen some content that was really rough, sexual content that was really rough, and thought, oh my gosh, if that's what sex is, I don't want anything to do with that.
Right.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, the tech normalizes all kinds of stuff that should not be normal.
Yeah.
One thing to think about here is I just want to take it back to being parents, right, and what that means, right? If your kids aren't ever disagreeing with any choices you make,
right,
you may want to look in the mirror and ask if you're really parenting.
You're just a friend.
Yeah, and I think there's so many parents now that want to be friends first. But this is a cart before the horse deal. Like if you are a parent first, meaning protect and grow and guide and shape, then you get to be a mentor.
Yeah.
And then eventually you get to be a friend.
Yeah.
But if you start off trying to be a friend, then you realize, wow, wait, now it's too late, but I'm trying to parent anyway, and it's really hard, and you never get there. So it is just imperative for parents to step up. And I said it earlier, but like we can't expect our kids to not be zoning out on social media if we are.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got to lead by example.
Totally.
And we got to step up, and we got to parent.
Yeah, I said that on the Distracted Driving podcast. If you ever want your kid to not drive distracted, you better not be doing it either.
That's right. More is caught than taught.
Yeah, like your son. I mean, I know you guys are. You probably consider him one of your best friends. Y'all go on camping trips and amazing adventures together. But you were his dad first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Always. And of course, Elizabeth, you're the mom. Well, thank you guys. I like this because it's such a big problem, but there's a simple solution to it. Like, we can actually fix this.
The tide is turning
Very
here
simple.
too.
The tide is turning.
We're encouraged for the first time since we've been doing this, and for 4 years now, that it is really starting to turn.
And all it takes is good parents reaching out to other folks, getting together and sticking together.
That's right. That's right.
Well, thank y'all for coming on the show today.
Our
Thank you,
pleasure.
Joe.
You guys are amazing. Thank you for the work you're doing in the community. And we'll see you guys around.
All right.
Sounds great.
Hey there, listeners. I hope today's episode has been enlightening and inspiring. As we dive into these important conversations about safety and community, I'm reminded of why I became a personal injury lawyer in the first place. Every day, I see people whose lives have been turned upside down because of some accident in one shape or form or another. It's a confusing, overwhelming time, and it can feel impossible to know where to turn. If you or someone you love have been in an accident and you need honest guidance, visit PattersonPersonalInjury.com to schedule a free consultation with our team. We'll get to know you, we'll get to know your story, we're going to answer your questions, and we're going to help you understand all of your options, all with no obligation and no pressure. At Patterson Law Group, we've helped thousands of people rebuild their lives and find closure with honesty, transparency, and integrity. You deserve an advocate who will fight for your rights and for your future. So don't wait. Visit PattersonPersonalInjury.com today, and let's start driving change in your own life.